Meg says, "Hi Raphael, thanks so much for all this incredible information. I had a client today talk to me about the damaging effect Pilates can have on pelvic floor, and that we should know the muscles around the pelvic floor and know how to control them during Pilates exercises. The client was telling me that I should cue and talk about the feeling of stopping yourself from weeing. This is completely against how I cue, which is through external cues, and I found myself unable to stand my ground in saying that we don't cue pelvic floor. Am I right in saying this doesn't improve pelvic floor strength whether we cue it or not in terms of causing a damaging effect? My client was very adamant in saying that pelvic floor can be easily damaged if we don't know how to control the muscles around it. I want to be confident in my answer here, as this won't be the first time I'm approached about this. Looking forward to your response." Well, here's my response. Your client has been sadly misinformed, and I'm sorry that she has, because I imagine that the person who misinformed her was well-meaning, but they've put the fear of God into her, and that's not a good thing when it comes to your pelvic floor. Pelvic floor is a strong and robust part of your body, and she got part of it right though. The feeling of stopping yourself weeing, that is a pelvic floor contraction. And that is one of the key functions of the pelvic floor. So if you are not incontinent, if you don't wee yourself, your pelvic floor is working, because if your pelvic floor is not working, you become incontinent. So millions of women around the world exercise every day, doing Pilates and running and yoga and CrossFit and cycling and weightlifting and swimming and all kinds of things, and don't wee themselves. So it is not the case that exercise causes people to damage their pelvic floor as a general rule. Now, of course, there are extremes on any spectrum. And there are some very high-level athletes who have problems with incontinence when they, squat or skip or whatever. But that's an edge case. For the absolute vast majority of women, postnatal or not, if they are continent, their pelvic floor is working fine. And you don't need to worry about damaging it. There is very good evidence that the pelvic floor co-contracts with the abdominals. So when you contract your abdominals, the pelvic floor also contracts automatically, because if you don't, you wee yourself. And so anything that strengthens the abdominals will strengthen the pelvic floor. And anything that strengthens the abdominals more will strengthen the pelvic floor more. So basically anything you're doing to strengthen the torso is going to strengthen the pelvic floor. Now, should you cue pelvic floor? Well, I've got a couple of studies I'd like to share with you on that. Now, this first one is from 2018. It's a systematic review on physiotherapy methods to facilitate pelvic floor muscle contraction. And so they looked at various different ways to help women to contract their pelvic floor effectively. And I won't bore you with all of the details, but what they found was this highlighted bit. In clinical practice, the ability to correctly contract the PFM or pelvic floor muscle is essential to training. This skill is at least as important as muscle strength. And so they're talking here about women who are incontinent and have pelvic floor issues, not average women. Only women who are able to perform correct contractions are eligible to perform pelvic floor muscle training. So that's pelvic floor muscle strengthening. And remember, again, these are women who are seeing women's health physios. So these are people who have problems. Clinically, a correct pelvic floor muscle contraction is felt during vaginal palpation exam as a tightening, lifting and squeezing action under the examining finger. So what this study found is that in order to tell whether your client is doing a correct pelvic floor contraction, you need to put on the latex glove and stick your finger inside the woman's vagina to palpate the pelvic floor muscles. Otherwise, you can't know if they're contracting them correctly. Now, that's not something you can do as a Pilates instructor. So just because you're cueing it doesn't mean they're doing it. And that is why if a woman or man has a problem with incontinence, urinary incontinence, they should see a pelvic floor physio, and that person will do a gloves-on exam to check whether they're contracting their pelvic floor correctly or not, and then we'll give them a individualised prescription of pelvic floor muscle contractions, because what turns out to be the case is some people who are incontinent, it's because their pelvic floor is weak, or it's because their pelvic floor is not contracting when it should. Whereas other people, an equal number of people who are also incontinent, it's because their pelvic floor is over-contracting or is contracting when it shouldn't. So if you take a bunch of people who are incontinent and tell them all, squeeze your pelvic floor, well, you're going to make some of them better and you're going to make some of them worse. And you don't know which ones are which until you put on the glove and stick your finger in the woman's vagina and palpate the pelvic floor muscles. Now, that is not a job for a Pilates instructor. It's a job for a women's health specialist physio, pelvic floor physio. So if women have problems with incontinence, they should go see a women's specialist physio. And that person will check their pelvic floor and give them the right cues for that specific woman to help her do a correct pelvic floor contraction, and then we'll do a customized program of pelvic floor muscle strengthening with the woman. That's not something you do in a Pilates class. And just here's one more study on that I want to share with you, and this was from 2011. It's a randomized controlled trial. Is pelvic floor muscle training effective when taught in a general fitness class in pregnancy? And what they found was no effect of pelvic floor muscle training was found when the exercises were taught in a general fitness class for pregnant women without individual instruction on correct pelvic floor muscle contraction. So basically, your client has been misinformed. Pelvic floors are strong and robust, and 99.9% of the time just work all by themselves with no further action required. I mean, think of your quad muscles. You know, when you walk, do your quad muscles work automatically? Yes, they do. How do you know they're working? You're walking. Same with pelvic floor. How do you know your pelvic floor muscles are working? You're not wetting your pants. And if you're not wetting your pants, there's no action required. Don't cue it because you won't improve it. And if you are wetting your pants, action is required, but that action should not take place in a group Pilates class. It should take place one-on-one with a specialist women's health physio, and they can really help. So go see one. But otherwise, just do any old abdominal strengthening exercise. In other words, just general exercise and Pilates, and that will improve pelvic floor strength. Hope that helps. And I'll link to these studies in the description of this video.